better to use because it's faster. Overall, I don't use this weapon too much, so I will give it a C tier. The Blood Sword is a very powerful.
I've been playing this game without you guys because I've been doing just a long run and I'm tired, like knackered. Let's see if we have anything new, because I did play. Let's see if there is anything new.
Or you just have some kind of
No.
such as a bloodthirsty shield. Overall, though, pretty good weapon, I would say. The broadsword has been buffed in the 2.4 update. It is very slow, but the damage it does is no joke. Now, assuming that you cannot dual bind, it's probably worse than it was before. I did do a Ice Shard plus broadsword run, and that was a dual binded run, and that was the first time I've no-hit by a PC boss. That being said, though, now that the broadsword cannot be dual binded, it is very slow and it's definitely a lot of defense. The crowbar needs the door to work, but the door is purple and the crowbar is red. And overall, if you don't do critical hits, it's very weak. It's just way too situational to use. So I would say it's not worth your time. The Ferryman's Lantern is definitely not my favorite two-handed weapon, but it's far from unusable. I just don't like the fact that the hits rely on this auto-targeting system, because 95% of the time when you use the lantern, you're going to be using the melee strikes, and you really don't want the soul shots to miss. Now the souls do a lot of damage, but you have to rely on the AI's auto-targeting system. If you miss, then there really is nothing you can do. It is a very cool weapon on concept, it's just you do have to work towards it with. The flashing fans needs some damage because it is a very timing-based weapon. However, if you can pull off the critical hits, it is very viable. Especially bosses, your bio choice actually matters because some bosses don't have projectiles, as do others. But if you find the time to master this weapon, 99. It is very good. The Flawless is a fantastic weapon if you're good at the game, but an atrocious weapon if you're not good at the game. Now, getting hidden is just way too risky in bosses, and you can potentially lose a lot of momentum and make the fight last long, or even just straight out lose the run. The Flawless can do very well in biomes because you can really just sit in one place and wait for the critical hits to come back, but since you can't do that in bosses, they can potentially land you in this downward spiral where you don't do enough damage, and the boss just keeps tagging you with hits. It's not my favorite weapon, but I can see how some people like it. The Flint needs to one-shot all normal enemies in the game, period. It just takes way too much effort to use right now. If you get to hear this footage, I have 5 stats in the prisoner's quarters, and a single charged attack with a Flint cannot kill a failed experience. Now, I don't know about you, but this is a little bit embarrassing. The Flint also was one of the weapons that did not get a buff in the recent patch, and I honestly think they can buff this weapon's damage even more, because you are using a lot of your resources to land a single hit, because you cannot move while you're charging the attack, and it takes a lot of time to even charge out the weapon. Overall, I can see the Flint being useful, it's just that at the moment, it's just way too weak. The Frantic Sword is a very strange weapon. It's a weapon that's very viable at 5 EC, and it's not as viable at 4 EC levels. Now,
it hears something in the background, that's a YouTuber who I'm watching.
Hit condition is a little hard to achieve, but even if you don't do critical hits, the sword still does a lot of damage. It's a weapon that you can just pick it up and it really doesn't require any synergies to go along with it. And if you can pull off critical hits, whether or not having below 50% health or over 50% malaise, it just does crazy damage. So overall, pretty solid weapon by itself. I will give it an A2. The Giant Killer has some very fringe usage if I find it in the cavern, and I know that I will be skipping High Peak Castle to fight Hand of the King. So I'll be fighting 2 bosses back to back. That being said though, I still think that the Giant Killer is just way too slow to be useful, and I hate the fact that you cannot control when you get critical hits. It's absolutely atrocious in the early game because it doesn't do nearly enough damage to normal enemies. And let's be honest here, you're not gonna wait until an enemy transforms into an elite PC just so you can get some extra damage. The suggestion for this weapon is that permanently raise damage of all giant killers you come across.
What was that? What was that?
Now, obviously, to prevent people in 5BC to just camp and kill elites to get infinite damage boosts, obviously put a ceiling on how much damage you can raise from that. But I think in this case, it would actually incentivize you to kill more elites, and it really fits into the theme of Giant Killer. Satori's Katana is the first weapon in the game to have 2 separate movesets and only taking up 1 slot. I really wish more weapons did this. The Katana has a very good design, and it is very powerful. So how I play the Katana is that I use the Predator mutation, which turns you invisible whenever you kill an enemy. Now, when this happens, because you're temporarily vulnerable while you're charging up the attack, you just turn yourself invisible, charge up the attack, you kill something, and then you rinse your until you clear it and biome. And most of the times, the enemies will not even notice that you're there. Overall, a fantastic biome clearing option, and it's not half bad at bosses. And I would say because of this flexible playstyle, the Katana is going to receive an S tier. The Hayabusa boots, in my opinion, is worse than the Spartan Sandals. The gimmick is very similar, however, it cannot stun lock enemies, at least not as efficiently as Spartan Sandals, because the knockback effect comes out in the last hit of the combo. Now, knocking over bombs is cool, but you do have to wait again until the final hit. And when you're playing Brutality, you don't want to wait like 2 seconds to get the value you want. You want the value right now. I can see some fringe usage, and I wouldn't mind using it as a placeholder. Hayabusa Gauntlets. I have yet to do a showcase on this weapon, but the constant crit damage on it is no joke. Now, obviously, you need a way to whittle down the enemy's health to activate its critical hit condition. It combos very well with Instinct of the Master of Arms, constantly doing critical hits, and constantly giving you cooldown on your skills. The Impaler has been buffed in version 2.4. I recently did a run with it with the Soul Shield, and it is actually very viable. It's very fun to use pushing people into walls and just hitting them with the Impaler, though you do have to be a little patient in bosses because you probably can't do crits in them. However, biome choice actually matters, because if you go to Mama Tick, you will always do critical hits because Mama Tick is up against a wall. It's a very interesting design, and just for some trivia, 1 hit from the Impaler actually does more damage than the shovel. If you're one of those people that's thinking the Impaler is a meme weapon, definitely give it another shot, because it's pretty decent. Yeah. So last time I put this in the D tier, but now comparing it to a lot of survival weapons, it's not that bad actually. It does work with the variations, which I almost never take, so that's a really interesting playstyle. I might do a showcase run of this weapon sometime later. I actually don't find the parry gimmick to be pretty hard to use. As a survival weapon, the damage is pretty good. You just need a pretty high learning curve because the majority of this damage comes when you parry an enemy. People usually sleep on the meat skewer thinking that it's not very good, but I can safely say it is actually very powerful. It has a pretty high learning curve because when you're dashing with it, you get iframes, meaning you are invulnerable while you're doing it. You can use this with the Assassin's Dagger or pretty quirky build where you dash behind an enemy and hit it with even if you use it as a main weapon, it's still pretty good in terms of damage. Again, movement is going to be something you have to get used to with the meat skewer, but if you can master this weapon, it is very solid. And on top of that, because of its versatility as a support weapon, I gotta give meat skewer the S tier treatment. The Nutcracker is overall a very solid survival weapon. There are a lot of possible synergies you can do with it, such as with Heart of Ice. You can pair it with a lot of support weapons, such as the Boy's Axe for looting, Ice Bow for freeze. You can also try Stun Grenade if you're feeling really lucky. Now, this is possibly the example of a good survival weapon that devs should strive towards. There are just a lot of ways to use it, and I can see a lot of flexibility in using it. The Oiled Sword historically has been nerfed a bunch of times, though even right now it's still very viable. It's the opposite to the Torch, so it needs burning synergy to work. Again, it does need a little bit of support from burning synergy. If you get that synergy though, you're pretty much unstoppable in biomes. The Oven Axe is possibly the slowest weapon in the entire game right now. I think that it's just way too slow to get value out of it. Now, it can be good in some biomes, but it's absolutely atrocious in bosses. As a survival weapon with an extremely slow swing speed, you need to do a lot of damage to make it worth its time, and currently it's just not working. If I were to do an estimate, one hit from the Oven Axe would do this much damage to a boss for me to maybe consider using it. But right now, it's way too slow.
Okay.
The rapier has been buffed in the recent patch. Now it has a larger
Okay.
hit window, and it makes Porcupine more viable, since you're probably going to be rolling a lot. The real flavor in the rapier, really, I think, is from the Porcupine mutation, because you can fit a lot of crazy things in there, such as Snake Fangs for poison, Blood Sword for bleed, so a lot of interesting synergies, and when you get some nice affixes on the rapier, comboing with a status effect to keep your backpack is just pretty good. Damage-wise, it is solid, and it also has some flexibility. The Rhythm and Bazooki has a pretty high learning curve, but it is very useful if you use it right. I did do a run with this weapon in the past. If you want to check that out, go ahead. It is a timing-based weapon, and it's one of the few weapons that's not good if you just spam it, because you will rarely find success if you spam with the Rhythm and Bazooki. Now, I actually think this weapon is probably one of the best survival weapons in the game damage-wise. The damage done by it is actually worth your time using, unlike, some other survival weapons. So believe it or not, I'm gonna put the Rhythm and Bazooki in the S tier. I just really like the design of this weapon, and it's very powerful. The Sadist Stiletto historically has been nerfed and then buffed again. I debated about having it in the S tier, but I just don't think it's that fun to use. I would say the Sadist Stiletto is probably the best no-brainer weapon in the game, because all you need is the Overuse mutation, and you can deal critical hits whenever you want. Is it the most powerful weapon in the game? Probably not. Is it easy to win with it though? Yes. I would say the Sadist Stiletto is a very solid weapon. There's just not too much creativity you can do with it. I had a suggestion where it does crits when you have 2 status effects on the enemy instead. I think that might make it a little bit more interesting to use. Now, believe it or not, the Scythe Claws is my favorite two-handed weapon in the game. It has a learning curve, and it is very powerful if you can use it right, especially with the new Kill Rhythm mutation, which speeds up your attacks whenever you alternate them. In terms of slowness, this weapon can feel a bit slow at times, but trust me, the damage it does is well worth it. It is extremely satisfying when you alternate between the 2 attacks and just wipe out everything in a biome. And even in bosses with the help of the Cocoon skill, which allows you to parry, it has some very good defensive options as well. So Scythe Claws, I'm gonna say it's also an S tier weapon. Seismic Strike, you can use it to lock down enemies with Wolf Trap or Heart of Ice. It is very slow and it tests your skills to cancel or to commit to an attack. In terms of rooting, it does have some pretty interesting synergies, although I'm just not very good at using it myself. I can definitely see the complexity and uniqueness of constantly locking down enemies, so I would say it's overall a pretty good weapon. The shovel can technically be used as both a main and a support weapon, but it's held back by its low damage. It's a pretty good survival weapon overall though, I just wish that it did more damage. Because like I said before, a single Taylor weapon actually does more damage than the shovel. So I think they can buff the damage of the shovel even more. The Shrapnel Axe has got a buff in the recent patch. It works very well with Ripper now. You can pair it up with another ranged weapon or a shield. Not a lot of weapons in the game pair well with Ripper, so this is probably one of the few melee weapons that work better in tactics. I have yet to do a run with it, but from testing, it does feel a lot better than this. Is it the most powerful synergy in the game? Probably not, but overall, it's viable. The Snake Fangs, arguably, is the best designed weapon in the game, at least in my opinion. It works off of poison synergy, and because of the teleport gimmick, you can pair it up with a lot of interesting other weapons, such as or there are just so many ways you can get creative with it. You can even pair it up with the Porcupine mutation and put it in the backpack to give yourself a bleeding status. And like I said before, if your weapon has versatility, it's gonna score high on this list. And Snake Fangs is no exception. It's gonna go up in the S tier for sure. The Spartan Sandals is a very solid support weapon. It can potentially stun lock elites and other enemies enemies, you can just hit them against the wall over and over again. It has some insane biome clearing potential. Obviously, this kind of mechanic doesn't really translate too well into bosses, so you do have to switch it out for something else. But as a support weapon, like I said, it's very good. If you can find a place to try it out, definitely go for it. I found a use for it with Valmon Split because when you get the enemies back, it gets them in range to get critical hits from Valmon Split. If I'm gonna be honest, half the time I even forget that the Spike Boots is even in the game. What do I have to say about this weapon? It has a
goodness. Bad. No!
And overall, you're not gonna wait until enemies attack you just so you can get critical hits with it. As I would say, it's just way too risky. You're just gonna keep hammering on the enemy no matter what. And when you put it that way, the Spike Boots really doesn't put too much variety into your gameplay. Overall, it's just kind of a forgettable weapon. The Spike Sword really excels whenever you use the tonic skill. You can let enemies chip away your blue health while holding a shield and then deal critical hits right afterwards. It's a very unique playstyle, but I would say this is a weapon that's really good if you're just trying to have some fun and not too fixated with winning. Because this is a pretty unique build, and I don't imagine that a lot of people trying to beat the game are going to use the Spike Sword. However, even if you don't do critical hits, the Spike Sword is still extremely good. The Swift Sword, just like the Spike Sword, has a very unique playstyle. Again, you use Tonic because even though it doesn't say it in the tooltip, Tonic actually gives you a speed boost when you use it. And it probably uses a very fringe mutation, and that is Velocity, which increases your speed boost. It's very good at biomes go fast. So again, a very unique playstyle, and in bosses you can actually pull off crits because of Tonic. Some people say it's the best weapon in the game, and I will more or less agree. It's definitely up there with the upper echelon of weapons. The symmetrical lance boasts a very long range. Once you swing with it, the attack probably covers half of the screen. It's more viable as war/violence since enemies teleport to you, so you'll find more opportunities to land critical hits. It's a very solid survival weapon, and it's one of the few that's actually pretty good, even though you don't have high shards to combine with. The tactical, I feel, needs a damage buff to really make it work, because you're potentially committing a lot of effort into one attack. Because if you're close by to an enemy, you just kind of do a kick, and it doesn't do enough damage.
Oh goodness.
So you have to be further away from the enemy to actually do a dash attack, which is probably where the real damage comes in. Now, I'd say because of the conditions to be far away from the enemy, I would say the tentacle needs to be buffed to the point where pretty much one-shots every enemy when you dash with it. Because brutality and tactics don't have a lot of health to work with, you definitely want it to be worth the player's time. The Tombstone has a very unique mechanic. It's really cool to use in biomes, though it does need a lot of setup for the third hit, which is the one that drops the Tombstones. However, in bosses, it is completely useless because you can never pull off the mechanic, since you need to be killing enemies in order to drop Tombstones. Now, I think that Doom can be a good mechanic to have in the future of Dead Cells. I can totally see it being printed on other weapons too, but for the Tombstone, it's just way too slow, and I don't really like it. Again, like I said, it can be very good at biomes, but if it's bad at bosses, the weapon still can't score high on my tier list. The Toothpick is the final one of the three slow weapons introduced in 2.3. This is probably the only one of these three that I would consider using. It's fairly decent in biomes, though it is pretty slow. While it is slow, it does feel at least fast enough to feel responsive. However, again, just like the other two weapons, it is absolutely terrible in bosses. I like the gimmick of charging out the attack to break the club, except the charge up attack just doesn't feel rewarding at all to use. I understand that I have a lower than usual stat count, it just doesn't do enough damage to bosses. And the charge up attack is just way too slow, it's like 3 seconds. And there are no enemies in the game that are gonna wait 3 seconds for you to attack them. It's just not happening in a fast-paced game like Dead Cells. The torch is one of the few weapons that interact with burning synergy. You can use oil for maximum effect. It does have a pretty short range, so some biomes may not be as suited for the torch than some others, so you do have to think about your biome choices. But historically, the torch does a lot of damage, and it's possibly one of the best DOT weapons in the game. And just like the oiled sword, even though the torch doesn't do critical
Come here
hits,
a
as long
second.
as you have some good support with it,
A
you can
little
pretty
slow,
much melt
but
any
you
enemy.
seem
The
to
Toothpick
understand
got a
what
buff
I'm
boost
saying.
attachment.
I
It's
lost
definitely useful now,
a
but I share the same sentiments with this weapon as I
roan,
did the last time
so
I reviewed
you
it.
see
It's
I'm
just
a
kinda
little
too
stuck,
basic,
and I
and
need
it
my
takes too long
roan,
to get the
you
value.
see.
As a brutality
I would
weapon, you
mind
don't wanna wait
finding
until
it
you land
for
the third
me,
hit to
would
do
you?
damage. You want the damage right now. While I can appreciate the
Oh,
depth of this
thanks,
weapon, I
you.
just don't think it'll be as fun and viable as some of the other weapons on this list. The Valmont's Whip is a
Did you find
very powerful weapon if you can pull off critical hits. It can be paired up with a lot of things. Like I said before, you can pair it up with
Bob,
Spartan Sandals.
in that one.
I did pair it up with the Ice Boat to freeze the enemy in place so I can land critical hits. You can also use it with Force Axe to root enemies. If you have a good build going, you can actually one-shot the ground shakers in the caverns. Just like a lot of other S-tier items, Valmont's Whip is also going to receive the S-tier treatment. The forepan, just like the Torch, has a pretty small range, but it's still very solid nonetheless. You can either play defensively with a shield, or you can double down with damage with another support weapon such as throwing them. One skill that I find to be very good with the forepan is the grappling hook, because it brings the enemy right in, and you can land some free hits. Forepan, paired up with some nice skills and some nice support, and you got yourself a pretty solid setup. The War Spear also received a buff in 2.4. It fixed the one problem that I had with it before, and that is the charge up animation, because it just takes way too long. But at least this buff makes it somewhat bearable to use. I still don't like the fact that you cannot control the critical hits in situations, because you do have to be hitting 2 enemies at a time to land critical hits, and there's not enough ways you can control this. But as you can see, it's actually pretty good now, and it fixed the one problem that I had with it before. I definitely don't mind doing a run with it in the future, but you do have to work a little bit to make it work. The wrenching whip, last but not least, has also received a buff. Again, just like the twin daggers, it's kind of too basic, and it takes too long to get the value because you only do critical hits on the 3rd hit combo. Just like the twin daggers, I can appreciate buffing this weapon. It's one of the few weapons that's already available to you in the beginning of the game. So it is a bit basic, but on high BC levels, you definitely want something slightly better. So that's gonna do it for my 2.4 melee tier list in Dead Cells. Hopefully you found this video to be entertaining. If you have some thoughts, definitely let me know in the comments. For longtime viewers, I don't actually plan on doing a skills tier list for 2.4 of the game. I do plan on doing a range tier list.
What was that? Never mind. Come on, please give me a skin. Please I got a skin. How did I not get a skin? I'm ending my stream here.